Okay, so this is Hester and Pearl. So Roger Chillingworth, a deformed old figure with a face that haunted men's memories longer than they liked, took leave of Hester Prynne and went stooping away along the earth. All right, one thing I'm noticing right away is our reminder again of Chillingworth that he is misshapen. Here he is, he's stooping. He gathered here and there an herb or grubbed up a root and put it into the basket on his arm. His gray beard almost touched the ground as he crept onward. So again, he's so hunched over, his beard is almost touching the ground. Deformity, remember? Hawthorne mentions a lot about deformity. Hester gazed after him a little while, looking with a half-fantastic curiosity to see whether the tender grass of early spring would not be blighted beneath him and show the wavering track of his footsteps, sere and brown, across its cheerful verdure. All right, this is again Hawthorne's pointing out the connection between humans and nature, and check this out. Hester is looking to see if the nice tender grass of early spring is going to shrivel up behind him, actually become burnt up and brown because of his evil side of his nature. Because remember, nature responds to us, at least in Hawthorne's point of view. She wondered what sort of herbs they were which the old man was so sedulous to gather. Would not the earth, quickened to an evil purpose by the sympathy of his eye, greet him with poisonous shrubs of species hitherto unknown that would start up under his fingers? Or might it suffice him that every wholesome growth should be converted into something deleterious and malignant at his touch? Did the sun, which shone so brightly everywhere else, really fall upon him? Lots of comments on nature and its relationship to human beings. And nature, if it doesn't respond to us positively, then it's a pretty good indication that Hawthorne says we shouldn't have anything to do with that person. So look at what Hester is wondering. She's wondering whether the things that the earth is going to respond to Chillingworth by producing poisonous shrubs. And also, as he touches things, is it going to become dangerous to us and malignant? Remember, malignant is unhealthy and bad. And even the sun, which shines everywhere else, isn't going to fall on him. I think about Pigpen in the Snoopy's comics and how he always has that cloud of dirt around him. Well, it seems like Hawthorne's suggesting that there's this ominous shadow that follows Chillingworth around. Or was there, as it rather seemed, a circle of ominous shadow, here we go, moving along with his deformity, whichever way he turned himself? And whither was he now going? Would he not suddenly sink into the earth, leaving a barren and blasted spot, where in due course of time would be seen deadly nightshade, dogwood, henbane, and whatever else of vegetable wickedness the climate could produce, all flourishing with hideous luxuriance? This is kind of an oxymoron here, hideous luxuriance, right? We have two very different words, opposite words really, put up against each other. And so Hawthorne's suggesting, as the earth responds to him, because he's so bad, either, we wouldn't be surprised to see him sucked into the earth. Or the vegetation that is produced from him would be hideous, but it would also be luxuriant, meaning there would be a ton of it, because there's a lot of evil in him. Or would he spread bat's wings and flee away, looking so much the uglier the higher he rose to heaven? We're not talking about heaven with a capital H here. We're talking about just skyward. Is it ever good to transform into a bat? No. Be it sin or no, said Hester Prynne bitterly as she still gazed after him, I hate the man. Well, this is very unusual for Hester to be saying something like she hates him. And so let's see how she responds to herself, actually. She upbraided herself, so she is scolding herself for this sentiment, but she could not overcome or lessen it. Attempting to do so, she thought of those long past days in a distant land where he used to emerge at eventide from the seclusion of his study and sit down in the firelight of their home, and then the light of her nuptial smile. He needed to bask himself in that smile, he said, in order that the chill, remember Chillingworth, of so many lonely hours among his books might be taken off the scholar's heart. So here we have, right, that he's coming out and he wants to see Hester because Hester warms him. Okay, I can't write on here, so warms him, and he is all about coldness. And remember that Hawthorne says that we need to have some kind of passion, and he doesn't have that here. Such scenes had once appeared not otherwise than happy, but now as viewed through the dismal medium of her subsequent life, they class themselves among her ugliest remembrances. So think about what she's doing here. She's correcting herself because she's had this bad thought about Chillingworth, that she hates him, and so she reflects back on the time early in her marriage when she thought that they had some happy times. But even when she reflects on this, she recognizes that there's a falseness and there is something wrong about the relationship even then. She marveled how such scenes could have been. She marveled how she could have ever been wrought upon to marry him. She deemed it her crime most to be repented of, that she had ever endured and reciprocated the lukewarm grasp of his hand, and had suffered the smile of her lips and eyes to mingle and melt into his own. And it seemed a fouler offense committed by Roger Chillingworth than any which had since been done him, that in the time when her heart knew no better, he had persuaded her to fancy herself happy by his side. So we already know that Hester has done, right, a crime, at least in the Puritan society, committing adultery. But even now, she's looking at marrying Chillingworth as worse than what any other crime she has committed. That's saying a lot. And what is the problem with that? The problem is that she married and she didn't love him. And what is worse than that? What's worse is that Chillingworth was able to persuade her to marry him and to pretend or to get her convinced that she was happy by his side when that was never the case. Yes, I hate him, repeated Hester more bitterly than before. He betrayed me. He has done me worse than I did him. Let men tremble to win the hand of women, unless they win along with it the utmost passion of her heart. So this is key. You have to have a true love. You have to have a passion in a relationship. And we're not talking about sexual passion. We're talking about a tie and a passion of the heart. Else it may be their miserable fortune. So one other thing I meant to say earlier is this lukewarm grasp. Everyone's gone to shake somebody's hand and they have kind of like that fish handshake, that limp fish. And think about that. There is nothing there. It's kind of gross to even think about it. All right, so I just realized that I hadn't recorded anything here, so sorry about this. Let me go back. So at the beginning of this, from the previous slide, let men tremble to win the hand of woman unless they win along with it the utmost passion of her heart. Remember, we talked about how important passion is. Else it may be their miserable fortune, as it was Chillingworth's, when some mightier touch than their own may have awakened all her sensibilities to be reproached, even for the calm content, the marble image of happiness, which they will have imposed upon her as a warm reality. So here Hawthorne is telling us, right, that if, as in the case of Hester and Chillingworth, there was no passion between them. There may have been respect and maybe friendly love, but there wasn't passion, or at least on Hester's end. And so when that is the case, it doesn't mean that passion goes away. It means it's still there. And it may be dormant, but somebody else may come along and wake up or touch that passion. And really, is there anything warm about a marble image? Absolutely not. So this marble image of happiness is just a cold kind of relationship and not satisfactory or fulfilling. But Hester long ago to have done with this injustice? What did it betoken? Had 7 long years under the torture of the scarlet letter inflicted so much of misery and wrought out no repentance? The emotions of that brief space while she stood gazing after the crooked figure, again, Hawthorne's not subtle, he keeps repeating things, of old Roger Chillingworth threw a dark light on Hester's state of mind. So she's in a new place. She doesn't normally think about things that are particularly dark, revealing much that she might not otherwise have acknowledged to herself. He being gone, she summoned back her child. Pearl, little Pearl, where are you? Pearl, whose activity of spirit never flagged, had been at no loss for amusement while her mother talked with the old gatherer of herbs. At first, as already told, she had flirted fancifully with her own image in a pool of water, beckoning the phantom forth, and as it declined to venture, seeking a passage for herself into its sphere of impalpable earth and unattainable sky. So just like Hawthorne points out how the earth responds to Chillingworth at the beginning of this chapter, and it's responds in a negative way, it either shrivels up and dies or it produces poisonous things. Here we always see Pearl compared to nature or interacting with nature in a very positive way. There's always a lightness to Pearl. There was always a relationship between Pearl and the natural things around her. Soon finding, however, that either she or the image was unreal, she turned elsewhere for better pastime. She made little boats out of birch bark and freighted them with snail shells. She sent out more ventures on the mighty deep than any merchant in New England. She's got a great imagination, but the larger part of them foundered near the shore. She seized the live horseshoe by the tail, so you know horseshoe crabs, and made prize of several 5 fingers. We probably can guess that 5 fingers are, what do you call them? What do you call those things? Starfish, and laid out jellyfish to melt in the warm sun. Then she took up the white foam. I love this image. So the white foam is as you're at the beach and you see that little white foam along the edge of the waves that streak the line of the advancing tide and threw it upon the breeze, scampering after it with winged. Lots of always imagery associated with birds for Pearl. Lightness again, to catch the great snowflakes ere they fell. So can you just picture her scampering along the seashore, flinging up the white foam and dancing around underneath it, pretending it's like snow? Perceiving a flock of beach birds that fed and fluttered along the shore, the naughty child picked up her apron full of pebbles, and creeping from rock to rock after these small seafowl, displayed remarkable dexterity in pelting them. One little gray bird with a white breast, Pearl was almost sure had been hit by a pebble and fluttered away with a broken wing. But then the elf child sighed and gave up her sport, because it grieved her to have done harm to a little being that was as wild as the sea breeze or as wild as Pearl herself. So you might think, oh, Pearl, she's so mean, she's chasing after the birds. But think about that. That's a very typical childlike behavior. But what's important here is that when she thinks she has harmed a creature, she grieves about it. So she feels. She is remorseful for what she has done. Her final employment was to gather seaweed of various kinds and make herself a scarf or mantle and a headdress, and thus assume the aspect of a little mermaid. She inherited her mother's gifts for devising drapery and costume. So she's going to dress up as a little mermaid, decorating herself with seaweed. As the last touch for her mermaid's garb, Pearl took some eelgrass and imitated as best she could on her own bosom the decoration with which she was so familiar on her mother's. A letter, the letter A, but freshly green instead of scarlet. The child bent her chin upon her breast and contemplated this device with strange interest, even as if the one only thing for which she had been sent into the world was to make out its hidden import. So, import is to find out what it means, the meaning of something, and notice what Hawthorne does here. This is kind of awkward construction here, the one only thing. He's emphasizing that it seems to Pearl and perhaps to us that her reason for being is to figure out what is the importance, what is the meaning of this letter A. And is she mocking Hester here when she dresses up like her? No, it's all she's ever known. I wonder if Mother will ask me what it means, thought Pearl. Just then she heard her mother's voice, and flitting along as lightly as one of the seabirds, here we go again, appeared before Hester Prynne, dancing, laughing, and pointing her finger to the ornament upon her bosom. So again, it's not about making her mom feel bad. It is, she's only known her mom with this A. My little Pearl, said Hester after a moment's silence, the green letter and on thy childish bosom has no purport or meaning. But dost thou know, my child, what this letter means, which thy mother is doomed to wear? So Hester may be going into some dangerous territory here. Yes, mother, said the child, it is the great letter A. Thou hast taught me in the horn book. So the horn book was kind of like the early books that the Puritan kids would get to learn their alphabet and numbers and so forth. So, of course, like, what's the first thing you learn? You learn A. And so Pearl responds, like, yeah, it's the letter A. I've learned it through your education, the things you've taught me, but it's also what I've always seen on you. Hester looked steadily into her little face, but though there was that singular expression which she had so often remarked in her black eyes, she could not satisfy herself whether Pearl really attached any meaning to the symbol. She felt a morbid desire to ascertain the point. So Hester's going to find out if Pearl makes any connection with this letter. Truly do I, answered Pearl, looking brightly into her mother's face. It is for the same reason that the minister keeps his hand over his heart. Oh, here we go. And what reason is that? Asked Hester, half smiling at the absurd incongruity of the child's observation, but on second thoughts turning pale. What has the letter to do with any heart save mine? Nay, mother, I have told all I know, said Pearl, more seriously than she was wont to speak. Ask yonder old man whom thou hast been talking with. It may be he can tell. But in good earnest now, mother dear, what does this scarlet letter mean? And why dost thou wear it on thy bosom? And why does the minister keep his hand over his heart? So Pearl is, wondering what is going on, right? So, at first Hester wants to know what she knows about this letter, but she's opened up this conversation. And so now Pearl is saying, you know what? Can you please tell me, what is the deal with this letter? And I know there's some kind of connection between the letter and the fact that the minister keeps his hands over his heart. So I'd like to know the answer. She took her mother's hand in both her own and gazed into her eyes with an earnestness that was seldom seen in her wild and capricious character. The thought occurred to Hester that the child might really be seeking to approach her with childlike confidence and doing what she could and as intelligently as she knew how to establish a meeting point of sympathy. So Hawthorne is showing us here that in this particular case, Pearl has a moment of seriousness. Usually she's dancing around and frolicking. So this is an opportunity for Hester and Pearl to have a conversation. It showed Pearl in an unwanted aspect. Heretofore the mother, while loving her child with the intensity of a soul affection, had schooled herself to hope for little other return than the waywardness of an April breeze. This next part, a description of the April breeze, is very, very important because it is how Hester sees Pearl. And remember, it's another comparison to nature. And up until this point, Hester has thought of her, has loved her child intensely, but she hasn't expected that intense love back from Pearl. This April breeze, which spends its time in airy sport and has its gust of inexplicable passion and is petulant in its best of mood and chills oftener than caresses you, when you take it to your bosom, in requital of which misdemeanors it will sometimes, of its own vague purposes, kiss your cheek with a kind of doubtful tenderness. So far, this April breeze, it's all about having these gusts. You don't quite know when that's going to happen. Sometimes it's sad, right? But most of the time it's cold. It's not particularly warm and empathetic. It does that more than it caresses you. But occasionally it will kiss your cheek with a kind of doubtful tenderness. So we've seen this quality in Pearl throughout the book. Okay, it looks like I'm missing a page here from the chapter, but I'll just continue to talk about what happens after the other page. So we've been talking about the April breeze. It says, kiss your cheek with a kind of doubtful tenderness and play gently with your hair and then be gone about its other idle business, leaving a dreamy pleasure at your heart. And this, moreover, was a mother's estimate of the child's disposition. Any other observer might have seen few but unamiable traits and have given them a far darker coloring. But now the idea came strongly into Hester's mind that Pearl, with her remarkable precocity, right, and acuteness, might already have approached the age when she could be made a friend and entrusted with as much of her mother's sorrow as could be imparted without irreverence either to the parent or the child. So, here Hester's thinking, well, perhaps Pearl is at the age where I could actually share something with her that's appropriate. And that's what Hawthorne means when he's saying without irreverence either to the parent or the child. In the little chaos of Pearl's character, there might be seen emerging, and could have been from the very first, the steadfast principles of an unflinching courage, an uncontrollable will, a sturdy pride, and by the way, these are all of Pearl's qualities, which might be disciplined into self-respect and a bitter scorn of many things, which, when examined, might be found to have the taint of falsehood in them. So at some point, we see these things emerging in Pearl, but they're certainly going to grow and ripen as she grows up. She possessed affections too, though hitherto acrid and disagreeable as are the richest flavors of unripe fruit. So here we go, unripe fruit. With all these sterling attributes, so sterling, think about sterling silver, that's quality, right? So these are positive attributes, thought Hester. The evil which she inherited from her mother must be great indeed if a noblewoman do not grow out of this elfish child. So it's very optimistic. Because there's far more good, according to Hester here, and certainly according to Hawthorne, than anything negative we've seen in Pearl. Pearl's inevitable tendency to hover about the enigma of the Scarlet Letter seemed an innate quality of her being. From the earliest epoch of her conscious life, she had entered upon this as her appointed mission. Hester had often fancied that Providence had a design of justice and retribution in endowing the child with this marked propensity, but never until now had she bethought herself to ask whether linked with that design there might not likewise be a purpose of mercy and beneficence. So up until this point, Hester's thought, well, maybe there's, only negative things that will come out of the relationship between Hester and Pearl and the Scarlet Letter A, but perhaps with her fascination, but maybe at this point, Pearl's fascination could actually be a way to give Hester some relief. If little Pearl were entertained with faith and trust as a spirit messenger no less than an earthly child, might it not be her errand to soothe away the sorrow that lay cold in her mother's heart and converted it into a tomb, and to help her to overcome the passion once so wild, and even yet neither dead nor asleep, but only imprisoned within the same tomb-like heart? So remember that earlier in the book, we see that Hester has kind of lost all of her passion, but it's dormant, it's still there. And here Hawthorne is pointing that again, that it's neither dead nor asleep, but only hiding. Such were some of the thoughts that now stirred in Hester's mind with as much vivacity of impression as if they had actually been whispered into her ear. And there was little Pearl, all this while holding her mother's hand in both her own and turning her face upward while she put these searching questions once and again and still a third time. So, Pearl's asking what's going on with the heart, with Dimmesdale and his hand over his heart, what's going on with the Scarlet Letter. And she's also being very serious and holding her mom's hand, showing a tenderness and an earnestness that is not always associated, or very infrequently associated, with Pearl. What does the letter mean, mother, and why dost thou wear it, and why does the minister keep his hand over his heart? What shall I say, thought Hester to herself? No, if this be the prize of the child's sympathy, I cannot pay it. Then she spoke aloud. So Hester decides that it's too much to put this on Pearl, and she's not going to answer the question honestly. Silly Pearl, said she, what questions are these? There are many things in the world that a child must not ask about. What know I of the minister's heart? And as for the Scarlet Letter, I wear it for the sake of its gold thread. So totally untrue. In all of the 7 bygone years, Hester Prynne had never before been false to the symbol on her bosom. It may be that it was the talisman of a stern and severe, but yet a guardian spirit which now forsook her, as recognizing that, in spite of his strict watch over her heart, some new evil had crept into it, or some old one had never been expelled. As for little Pearl, the earnestness soon passed out of her face. So Hester doesn't answer her honestly, and now this seriousness, this moment where she could have been true perhaps, passes. But the child did not see fit to let the matter drop. 2 or 3 times as her mother and she went homeward, and as often at supper time, and while Hester was putting her to bed, and once after she seemed to be fairly asleep, Pearl looked up with mischief gleaming in her eyes. "Mother," said she, "what does the scarlet letter mean?" And the next morning the first indication of the child being awake was by popping up her head from the pillow and making that other inquiry, which she had so unaccountably connected with the investigations about the scarlet letter. "Mother, mother, why does the minister keep his hand over his heart?" "Hold thy tongue, naughty child," answered her mother with an asperity that she had never permitted to herself before. So she's being a lot more strict than she normally is, or harsh. "Do not tease me, else shall I shut thee in a dark closet." So stop talking about this, Pearl, or I'm going to put you in a dark closet. I am going to punish you for not letting go of this issue. But you notice that Hawthorne is pointing out to us here the importance of this question and the need for Pearl to know the answer.